Lately, I have been talking about book cover design, and at its heart, book covers are a combination of text and image. One thing I would love to do as a writer at some point in my career is create something along the lines of a graphic novel. Today, I want to talk about an expert combination of text and image. That is The Sleeper and the Spindle, written by Neil Gaiman and illustrated by Chris Riddell. The Sleeper and the Spindle is a young adult short story that has been transformed into a cross between a picture book and a graphic novel. It's still aimed at that young adult, teenager/adult audience. And it works because Riddell and Gaiman had such a great partnership. This is Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping writers like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers. Because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. So let's talk about that relationship. Working with another artist, combining text and image. When you examine the pages of The Sleeper and the Spindle, Gaiman and Riddell's partnership immediately becomes evident. They worked together to create something bigger than either of them were capable of doing on their own. One way they were able to do this was by not repeating each other. They trusted each other enough to take care of different parts of the story. One of the ways they did this is by divvying up the world building and plot. Gaiman was able to focus on the immediate story and allow Riddell to flesh out the world. Here's an example of the main characters of this story on their journey. Even the dwarfs, who were tough and hardy and composed of magic as much as of flesh and blood, could not go over the mountain range. This was not a problem for the dwarves. They did not go over the mountain range. They went under it. This passage is paired with an image by Riddell, in which we see the dwarves on their journey, and then we see this large creature in the background. What's happening is Riddell is fleshing out the world. He's letting you know there are other things in these passages that the dwarves might need to watch out for. Because Riddell covers these things in the images, Gaiman doesn't have to talk about them in the words. That's when a partnership between text and image really works, is you are allowing each member of your partnership to shine and to do what they do best, and you're not attempting to control or repeat each other. If you're thinking about creating something along these lines with another writer, whether you want to co-author something or create a combination of text and image or some other medium, remember to focus on the end product. You might have some disagreements along the way. Regardless of what you argue about and what you agree upon, the final book should appear cohesive. Everything should work together. All of those little disagreements that come with working with someone else should not make it into the book itself. Gaiman and Riddell might not have agreed on everything, but you can't tell in The Sleeper and the Spindle. That's what you should shoot for when you have a partnership. Even though I just talked about how Riddell and Gaiman didn't repeat themselves, they did repeat key aspects of the story. Next, I want to talk about repeating the right information. There are certain parts of your story that you might want to reinforce by having each member address them in their own way. One thing that Gaiman and Riddell wanted to reinforce in The Sleeper and the Spindle was how the queen wasn't too sure she wanted to get married. Gaiman says, "It would be the end of her life," she decided, "if life was a time of choices. In a week from now, she would have no choices. She would reign over her people. She would have children. The path to her death, heartbeat by heartbeat, would be inevitable." Here, Gaiman is explaining how the queen is feeling. A few pages later, Riddell illustrates the queen being fitted for her wedding dress, and the look on her face expresses this same sentiment. So Riddell and Gaiman are both saying the same thing. They're both saying the queen isn't really too interested in getting married and following this path that's been laid out for her. But they're doing it in different ways, and they're repeating this because it becomes crucial to the end of the story. Gaiman and Riddell also repeat smaller things. For example, Gaiman doesn't name the characters in this story, so to differentiate between the dwarves, he'll say things like the dwarf without a beard. Well, Riddell also draws that dwarf without a beard. So small things like that are going to be repeated, just like some descriptions might be. When you're putting together this creative endeavor with your partner, be sure and talk about what is super important to your story, and talk about the things that you both might want to include in your part of the project to reinforce the importance of these aspects. For example, you might talk about your character's emotions so that you're both on the same page and illustrating the same thing. Or you might talk about important plot points or symbols. Look for ways you can reinforce these important parts. At the same time, pay attention to other things that you might be repeating unintentionally and make sure that you do want to do that, or you might need to change some things so those are not reinforced in the same way. In order to create an impactful, finished piece of art, you need to have these conversations and ask these questions. You'll have to edit the project as a whole, as well as each of you editing your own individual pieces. So take a step back and look at everything. Make sure it's all working together. Next, I'd like to share why an editor believes writers should read The Sleeper and the Spindle. One of the reasons I love The Sleeper and the Spindle is because it's a mashup of two well-known fairy tales. I love fairy tales, but I like the darker versions of the tales more than some of the lighter versions, and The Sleeper and the Spindle is a good in-between those two. Also, fairy tales lend themselves to be illustrated. When fairy tales were first written down, they were accompanied by images and tokens, so combining text and image for a fairy tale story is a natural thing. Regardless of whether or not you want to create a graphic novel or picture book or something along these lines, you are going to combine text and image in any published book. That's because of your cover. Even if that's the only imagery in your book, you are going to have to figure out a way to combine the image of your cover with the text of your title and your author name, as well as the back cover copy, and it all needs to work with your book as a whole. Take a look at The Sleeper and the Spindle or a similar novel and pay attention to how those two artists are combining text and image. Riddell often does call-outs. He pulls lines from the text and writes them in a fancy font to reinforce that line or to create image out of words. He also chose to use black, white, and gold as the colors for his illustrations. The places he chose to use gold really pop. This is something you might think about when designing your cover. If you use black, white, and another graphic color to represent your story, certain elements are going to pop on that cover. You might want that. You might not. You might also consider doing a call-out of some text or making your title look like a call-out, like Riddell did. One way to get ideas for how to have fun with your book cover is by looking at things like graphic novels that combine text and image. Remember when you go in to work with your cover designer that this is a creative partnership. They are experts at creating image and combining that image with the text from your title and your name and your back cover copy. So respect their expertise. At the same time, they should respect your expertise as the author. Communication is going to be key to any effective partnership. And if you think of your book cover as a partnership, you'll probably be more open to new ideas from your cover designer. What I like to do when I'm working with graphic designers, whether it's for my business or for my books or something else entirely, is I'll tell them what I want, what I have in mind, and then I'll also ask them to show me their ideas. Often when you work with a graphic designer, they'll give you 3 things to choose from. They'll give you 3 mock-ups, and then you pick the one that you want to edit and really make your own. I like to let at least one of those mock-ups be their own creation, because even though I'm a visual person and I love looking at imagery, that's not my expertise. Often they come up with something way cooler than I ever could have. So consider that when you're working with your cover designer. What other ways do you think the text and image of The Sleeper and the Spindle complement each other? Share them in the comments below. And for more videos talking about mixing mediums like text and image, or working with a cover designer, subscribe to Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping writers like you transform your writing so it lingers with readers. Because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. To find out more about me, go to www.ignitedinkwriting.com. There you will also find a timeline of a book, which is an organizational chart showing you when you should be working with cover designers and when you should be just focused on your writing. And now it's your turn to read The Sleeper and the Spindle by Gaiman and Riddell, or to look at other combinations of text and image to see how they can help you ignite your ink.